Hi guys, welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be doing something slightly different, and we're going to be using rocks or studying these rock forms as a way to understand or better understand how planes work. So it's sort of a twofold thing. We're going to be learning about drawing rocks, but also rocks can be a very good way to understand planal forms. So we've talked a little bit about planal forms before. Last week we were looking at structures of the head, which looked a lot at planes. So this week we're just going to be looking at how we can sort of separate out different aspects or different surfaces of these rocks in order to block them out, basically. So we know the rock is being lit from the right hand side, which is causing shadows primarily on the left hand side, both form shadows that are part of the rock and also cast shadows where one rock is blocking light from another. We're not worried about the rest of the landscape. We're just going to focus in on this group of rocks because it's really just a planal study. So the first thing I want to do is just create like a little boundary around these rocks, sort of like a gesture almost. It doesn't have to be, we're not worried too much about kind of a super high level of accuracy for these rocks. So you can see we're just getting in the approximate shapes of the rocks first, the sort of outside boundary of the rocks. So that's the top two, kind of basic blocked in. So we just have this last one kind of down below. And as I say, we're not going to worry too much about how it's grounded, but just get it roughly sort of blocked in. Because we're thinking more about the forms of the individual rocks. We're just going to looking at lots of ways that these sort of the planal forms in these rocks can make sense. So when we talk about planes, we're talking about kind of large flat areas of these forms that make up the whole structure. So if you imagine a sort of wireframe, you've got sort of the back shadow there, then it's a sort of mid-value here because it's partially receiving light, and then the top is a lot lighter. So if we were to go in and try to divide this form up, we would start with this little back form here, this back edge. And the side edge, the side plane. And then this back plane is broken up by another smaller plane, which is quite prominent, that light shape that features just there. And again, it connects up to another sort of darker plane at the back. So now this portion of the form is more blocked in. I can start to darken it. It's almost kind of pure black in the reference. We're going to get a little kind of exaggeration of depth or kind of increase in darkness at the bedbug line, the bit that meets the lighter forms. So we're getting a little bit of reflected light back into that plane. Then we've got a small section of some more dark little bits up there, but that's just about most of that plane blocked in, and that plane is a little bit lighter than we see a tiny bit of the very bottom plane of this rock. So that bottom plane is going to be the darkest. It's receiving no light directly, well, no light directly and very little indirectly. So where we have a little bit of reflected light kind of coming back up and hitting, or kind of coming in and hitting this plane that's facing away from the light source, there's absolutely none that's hitting this bottom plane. So therefore it ends up very dark. Then up here we've got, can sort of break up the top form a little bit. It doesn't need to be super complexly broken up. Got a little bit of this, another plane that faces downwards, so that's dark. So we're always thinking about, you know, what direction is each plane facing relative to the light. And then the final important plane we've got on this rock is, well, I've got a few little bits up there, but generally they're all kind of blocked in. We've got this one here, which isn't quite a shadow plane, it's more of a side plane, so it's going to be a mid value, like a dark halftone value. But it's an important sort of bridge between these really dark planes and the really light planes, which kind of make up the bulk of the rock. And then within this we've got a few more little dark notches here and there. And with that, we roughly capture a pretty good suggestion of this rock. There are maybe a few planes, like say just here, some sort of lighter mid planes that aren't necessarily receiving direct light either. So they're going to be a little bit lighter than this bottom section. And that pretty much does it for that top rock form. So if you move to the one below it, it's a simpler form, largely defined just by the bottom edge, but also by this cast shadow. And then also the bottom plane of it. So in this case we see a little bit less of the bottom plane, but it's still there. So you can keep it fairly simple. Mostly runs its way up. It's got some little sections that jut up. So sort of approximately block them in. And then quite quickly that drops down into this final section, which is a bit more complex, this little block down below. Simplify it. What we're primarily concerned with is this sort of darker plane and shadow. Then we've got a light plane catching more light, which sort of connects to the shadow, and then another sort of isolated little light plane that angles back. Back up towards the light, and then the rest of this ends up in shadow. So these are little sort of shadow notches. We know that all of these shadows go pretty dark, so I can just kind of quickly rough them in as darker forms. We'll go back over with the smaller pencil. I just want to get them roughed in. So we've got the shadow planes blocked in, well, largely blocked in on this bottom one. And then we also want just to add a bit of tone into the side planes. So these side planes are not receiving as much direct light, so particularly on this one, say nearer the right hand edge, it kind of lightens off a bit towards the right, so we're getting this sense of a kind of curve back in. That's sort of capturing that curve of the rock. We've also got this little light section, light plane down the front bottom edge. And then on this one, we've got this other side plane, which can have a little bit of tone in it. Not an enormous amount. So to recap, we can kind of now start to analyze how these are structured. So the light source is coming from up here, roughly. So that's causing this dark cast shadow here on the top surface of this rock. It's also, there's a little bit of a cast shadow here as well. So basically this rock, you know, as the light rays travel, they're blocking that. Then we've got these planes on the top rock, which is what we're looking at today. So you've got sort of one plane, that's a side plane, so this one needs to go reasonably dark. Kind of unify all of that together. And then all of these, every plane that's facing in a similar direction is going to be a similar value because they're all facing away equally from the light source. So all of these go dark as well down here, they're all also facing away from the light source. And then the side planes, which have these halftones, they're semi-facing towards the light source, but not entirely. And then the top planes, or the lightest bits, the white of the paper, they're all facing up towards the light source. So that's basically how it works. It's not that complex, really. And rocks are a good way to kind of understand planal structure, because they've got very obvious, quite blocky, generally blocky forms. So even if you simplify something to this level, you can sort of see how those planes are functioning, those forms. So I'd highly recommend sort of taking a look at some rocks. I mean, if you go out and draw them, that's ideal, or you can find references of them online. This one's just from Unsplash. You just need to kind of search rocks, really, and just look for some nice strongly lit rocks. So something like this is ideal, and you can see just by kind of focusing in on those forms. I've not like super accurately copied the reference. I'm just thinking more about how the forms sort of work, how they interlock, how they relate to the light source. And then I know that if something's facing completely away from the light source and it's not receiving reflected light, it's going to be as dark as I can possibly go with the pencil. And then everything else is somewhere in between that, or between that and the sort of lightest values that you would get from those bits of the rock that face up towards the light. And then from here we would start to just kind of soften edges off, add more little planes within, but that gives us our kind of general block-in of the planes. But yeah, that's it for today. Hopefully it's illuminated how planes work, or at least helping a bit with that concept, which can be tricky when you're first starting out. As always, you can subscribe to our channel for this and more lessons of this kind from myself and other tutors. And if you click the link through, that'll take you to the OCAD page where you can sign up for actual direct contact with myself and other tutors to help you develop your art skills. But yeah, that's it for today, and I'll see you guys soon.